What's up guys, and welcome back to the series where I take a look at a place that I've been and dive a little bit deeper to try and uncover what was surprising or interesting about that place. And this video is all about Vietnam. Now to start things off, I'm going to let you guys know that I've actually lived in Vietnam for about 1 year. So everything I'm about to talk about is based on my experiences during that time. And the first thing that really surprised me about Vietnam was the food. Now I was expecting the food in Vietnam to be really good. You know, their emphasis on fresh ingredients, the really interesting French influence. I was really excited. And what surprised me most about the food was the different levels of quality and creativity across their dishes. You know, because Vietnam has been such a historically war-torn country, the availability of certain ingredients and the freshness has varied wildly throughout their history. And this is really where their food punches above its weight class, because they have so many unique and flavorful dishes that are produced with a very small number of ingredients. You know, you have the incredibly complex pho broth and the meat pho bo thai, the bean sprouts, the spices. It really takes soup, which is a basic dish, and it puts it on another level. And then the flip side of that, you have the banh mi, which is heavily influenced by French activity there. You know, it's just a simple baguette with like cucumber, maybe some meat, maybe an egg. It's kind of a quick on-the-go. Quality isn't amazing, but that's not really the intended purpose of it. And it's that kind of interesting contrast between those types of dishes that make Vietnamese cuisine really interesting. Now, I actually didn't know that Vietnamese actually have a whole philosophy when it comes to cooking. And they associate different foods with different temperatures. For example, duck is considered a cool meat, so it's served more often in summer, whereas chicken and pork is considered a warm meat, so they serve it in winter. Not to mention their emphasis on colors, the way they arrange the different dishes. There's a lot more thought that goes into it than you first would have thought. And sort of tied into the food is the coffee. Coffee was introduced to Vietnam by a French Catholic priest in 1857. And Vietnam didn't actually start producing coffee themselves until the Doi Mui economic reforms in 1986. And today they're the second largest producer of coffee in the world. And man, it kicks your ass. Now, I actually don't drink that much coffee myself, so take this with a grain of salt, but when I was in Vietnam and I would have a cup of coffee, I wouldn't be able to drive afterwards. I was so wired, it felt like I was on drugs. And probably part of that is the way that they drink the coffee, which is very, very slowly. You know, you order a cup of coffee, iced coffee, and you sit down for like an hour and a half, 2 hours finishing it. And then in America, you get it into go cup and down it within the first 5 seconds. And interestingly, because of the low availability of fresh milk, they actually substitute that with sweetened condensed milk, which changes the taste a lot. Now moving on to the second thing that was really surprising about Vietnam, and that was the traffic. Now there are over 50 million motorbikes registered in Vietnam, which doesn't even include the unregistered ones. So the traffic in the big cities is absolutely insane. The reason there's so many motorbikes there is because there's actually a 200% tax on cars. So in order to own a car, you kind of have to have some extra money lying around. Not to mention the fact that you get almost nowhere because it takes you about an hour to go 1.5 miles. Now the way that traffic works can be pretty overwhelming at first, especially when you're doing stuff like crossing the street, where usually you stop and wait. Vietnam, that's not what happened. You kind of just enter the traffic stream, and it's everyone else's job to move around you and accommodate you. So you kind of pick a path and you just walk forward regardless of what's happening to your left or right. For the most part. Kind of like a school of fish mentality. Now, one of my favorite quotes of people who have been to Vietnam and have seen this traffic and love Vietnam say, oh, you know, there's a method to the madness, right? Even though it's so crazy and there's so much going on, it kind of all works. And that's totally true. But what you may not know is that Vietnam is actually in the top 10 countries for traffic accidents in the entire world. So maybe there's not a method to the madness. But I will say that because of the density of the traffic, you're moving pretty slowly. So when there are accidents, usually you're only going like 5 miles an hour. So it ends up being maybe a fender bender at best. Usually there's not a lot of hospital trips involved. Man, I love driving in Vietnam though. There's something about it where every single thing that you do ends up being an adventure just because of how crazy it is to get from point A to point B. It's like your own Finding Nemo adventure packed into like a 10-minute ride, if that makes sense.
So right now I'm trying out the Uber Moto option for Saigon, which I have to say is both the fastest, the cheapest, and the most fun way to get around the city.
And And that leads me into the third thing that was really surprising about Vietnam, and that is how big the country is. So Vietnam covers an area of about 330,000 square meters, and for contrast, Japan is about 377,000 square meters. But only about 20% of that is actual flat land. The rest of it is made up of very dense tropical jungle, huge jagged mountains, and so on and so forth. And depending on the route that you go and how many places you stop, it can actually take up to 4 weeks to get from top to bottom on a motorbike. You know, you drive 6 hours in California and you're from San Francisco to LA. No problem. And the geographical layout of Vietnam is very narrow, so it's very long and narrow. And because of that, there are extreme differences in stuff like weather, but even food, language, culture. There's so much different stuff happening in the different parts of the country. And it makes it kind of hard to group them all together. You almost have to look at it in 3 different stages, which is north of Vietnam, central Vietnam, and then south Vietnam, each with their own unique differences. It was funny when I went north and visited Hanoi for the first time. I was talking to this Vietnamese guy, and he said something along the lines of like, oh, South Vietnamese are, you know, they're city boys. They don't really know how to do stuff with their hands. Women find North Vietnamese men more attractive. And then I went back to Saigon and I asked someone living there what he thought of that. And he said, oh, it's just the opposite. The girls want, you know, someone in finance and business. They want someone in a big city. Kind of funny. And despite these differences, this is going to actually be my 4th surprising thing, and that is their intense sense of community. You know, it's the kind of place where you know all of your neighbors know all of your neighbors, and you get the feeling that the attitude is like, we're all in this together, we're all just trying to get through this, let's help each other out the best we can. For example, I was driving my motorcycle down the street one time and like kind of clipped a little part of a wall or something. The mirror kind of popped off a little bit, so it was hanging, so I had to pull over, stop. You know, I'm trying to jam it back in. It's not really working. And then, you know, I feel like the back of my neck. I turn around. There's this Vietnamese guy sitting there watching me, you know, kind of intrigued, trying to figure out what's going on. And he looks at it for a while and then disappears and comes back with like some tape. Now, of course, Scotch tape, not going to really work in this situation. But, you know, we sat there and I tried with him. We tried to tape it. Didn't work. You know, give me the hold on 1 sec gesture. Disappears, comes back with 2 more Vietnamese guys. This time they have a hot glue gun. You know, it's like, without even asking, when someone sees that you're in trouble or need help, they will try and help you. And, you know, cut to the end of that story where at some point there was like 5 of us trying to put this stupid mirror back on. You know, they're not doing it for money or anything like that either. They're just trying to help you out. And that's something that I really find is lost in some of America. You know, a lot of these people, especially in big cities, you don't know who your neighbors are. You don't have a ton of interactions with them. And it's nice to see that that is still the case elsewhere in the world. And the next thing that's surprising about Vietnam was their sense of entrepreneurship. Now this is interesting because Vietnam is a communist country. You know, their actual title is the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. You know, they have a one-party political system. But despite that, Vietnam has kind of adopted a communist but not policy, like a capitalist communist policy, if that makes sense. Where they kind of let the free market do its thing, at least in terms of business. And that might be surprising, but it was super cool to see that in action, especially in a big city like Ho Chi Minh. You know, and you see that everywhere. It's impossible to miss. You know, from the hundreds of street food stalls that line the streets, to motorcycle repair shops, clothing stalls, there's literally everything. And doesn't seem like it's very regulated. And, you know, a perfect example of this is on the street corner around from my apartment. You know, I walked past and suddenly it was paved one day. And I was like, interesting, cool, they paved that one sidewalk, great. You know, and then on the wall against it, it becomes black and white tile. And then a chair appears the next day, bolted into the sidewalk. I'm like, okay, this is, what's going on here? 4 days in, a mirror gets hung on the wall, and there's a guy giving haircuts. You just set up shop on a street corner. It's that sense of go out there and do it that is really attractive and really fun to watch happen. Okay, so this next one is going to be a bit more controversial, but the thing that was surprising was their attitude towards Americans. And this applies to me specifically because I am American. I mean, 1955, that was when the war began in Vietnam. And for how recent that war was, their attitude is very different than what you'd expect. You know, I felt no animosity. In some cases, they were actually overjoyed that I was American or excited that I was American. You know, and a lot of that is because we fought with South Vietnam. You know, and these were people that were directly involved in the conflict, either them or their kids or their kids' kids. So you're meeting people and they're like, we fought with you. And that's how some people see it. And then on the flip side of that, if you come from the north of Vietnam, there's a huge sense of pride that they defeated, at the time, one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful country in the world by themselves. Ho Chi Minh actually had a lot of admiration for the United States. You know, he saw Vietnam's fight against French colonialism to be mirrored in that of the American War of Independence. And when Vietnam declared independence, the first line of their Declaration of Independence is almost copied word for word from ours. You know, we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal, certain unalienable rights, and so forth. We even supplied Ho Chi Minh with weapons and training during the Japanese occupation. It was only after he pledged himself to communism that we started to withdraw our support. One of my favorite quotes from Ho Chi Minh about this goes something like this: "Everything depends on the American. If they want to make war for 20 years, we shall make war for 20 years. If they want to make peace, we shall make peace and invite them for tea afterwards." I mean, doesn't that say it all? I mean, at the end of the day, it was just interesting to see what their attitude towards me would be, or knowing that I was American, and it was much more positive than I would have expected. Let's leave it at that. The last big thing that was really surprising about Vietnam was how happy the people are. Let me finish. Now, when you're walking around, you see people laughing and smiling a lot, especially in situations that don't necessarily make sense, like if you dropped a plate or you tripped and fell. And that's because I learned that there are different meanings behind their smiles. Whereas in America, people smile as sort of a courtesy. You're letting them know that they're there. And it always means good, for the most part. Not the case in Vietnam. That's because they really have two different types of smiles, and that is the simple smile and the implied smile. Now, the simple smile is smiling to express different emotions like happiness or even hope. Like a farmer might smile at his empty field hoping that it will one day prove fruitful or, you know, have crops, stuff like that. That's the simple smile. The implied smile is much more context-based. Now, a Vietnamese person might smile when they're sad because they don't want other people to become sad, and smiling helps them hold back tears. I mean, how awesome is that? The implied smile could also be nervousness, or if you don't have the answer to a question. It could also be scornful, like if you see someone make a mistake. And it can also mean sorry. So bottom line, smiling has a ton of different meanings. So just because you see someone smiling in the street, it doesn't mean they're smiling at you for the reason that you might think. That's because Vietnamese language and culture is pretty non-verbal. A lot of their communication happens without actual words. You know, a lot of gestures, you know, picking up on social clues, context, like I said before. And so smiling is just one of the ways that they can accomplish that. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. Let me know down below what you agreed with, what you disagreed with, and anything else that surprised you if you've been there. I look forward to reading these comments. I hope they're good. Anyway, hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you later.